Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session on working with electricity network to be efficiently EV ready. As EV adoption continues to grow, the challenge is no longer just about installing more chargers. It is about doing this in a way that it is efficient, sustainable, and joined up with a wider energy system. That means thinking about network capacity, smart load management, phase rollout, and importantly, early engagement with all relevant stakeholders. I am George Christodoulakis, Net Zero Program Manager at UK Power Networks DSO, Distribution System Operator. My team, the local Net Zero team, is working with local authorities in London, east and southeast of England, areas that UK Power Networks covers as network operator, on their long-term planning on how to reach net zero, including, of course, the EV strategy, which is the topic of today's discussion and panel. I'm really pleased to be hosting today's discussion, and I am joined by Phil Proctor, which is Technical Director at Buro Happold, and Pilgrim Beart, Vice President of Energy Services at Pod. Together, we will explore what practical collaboration looks like between charge point operators, consultants, networks, and customers, and how we can make sure EV infrastructure is delivered at pace. Before we move into the main discussion, I will ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, who they are, the organization they represent, and the role they play in the EV market. And if we can keep that in 1 minute, so it will help us leave time enough for the discussion. As we go through, feel free to post your questions on the chat function here, and we will address it as we go or towards the end of the session. So I'll give first the speech to you, Pilgrim.
Thanks very much, George. It's lovely to be here. So I'm Pilgrim Beart. I'm a computer engineer, a technology innovator. I've started various companies, including what became the smart home energy platform Hive, which has a couple of million customers now. And I'm now with Pod, the UK's largest provider of EV charging, part of EDF. Pod supplies many different sorts of EV charging, including public. You've probably seen us at Tesco, workplace, fleet. We recently acquired EO. But the largest part of our estate is domestic charging, and we have hundreds of thousands of chargers in people's driveways. So at Pod, I run energy services, which means grid flexibility. We built a smart charging platform, which now shifts gigawatt hours of energy. And the revenue from that has enabled Pod to move from just selling EV charger hardware to selling charging as a service powered by Flex. Our smart charging is helping DNOs, including UKPN, address constrained management zones, as well as participating in other national flex markets, such as wholesale capacity and the balancing mechanism.
Thank you so much, Pilgrim. And Phil?
Hi there, my name's Phil Proctor from Buro Happold. Buro Happold is a engineering consultancy in the built environment. As a business, we support the rollout of EV charging at scale. In our buildings team, we work on lots of various different developments that include naturally EV charging as a component of that now. My personal role is to lead our energy team's strategy and digital energy solutions, which includes looking at EV charging in itself for deployment at scale. We also do lots of local area energy planning and smart systems integration and design as well, which can all encompass EV charging. EV charging as an application, its strategy, that includes the commercial models, the technical models, the connection requirements, and also in the spatial context from a planning point of view, where they may be deployed at scale, and future rollout plans and scenarios to help local authorities deliver their decarbonisation targets. We also look at grid constraint, which is obviously relevant to George's area and the DSO function in terms of if there are any constraints, how we manage that, how we develop solutions around that, including smart energy solutions and contributions to the running costs through integration of renewable energy as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phil. So as you can hear, you have three different key market components representative on this panel. So hopefully we'll have a very interesting discussion. And I will start with um, putting the perspective of the EV evolution. And I would like to bring in Pilgrim on where you see the scale of the EV evolution. What is the impact on national level and on what time scale to understand the wider market on EVs?
Yeah, so I think just for a bit of context, it's going to be utter transformation, which is a great time to do innovation. My big picture model is that if you look at all the UK energy, then about a third of it's used in industrial and commercial, a third of it's used in the home, and a third of it's used for transport. And electrification is the main way we're decarbonizing all of those. By 2050, we're going to need to triple our electricity supply to do that. Less than you'd think, perhaps, actually, because electricity is so efficient and fossil fuels are so inefficient. Interestingly, actually, EDF R&D modeled that accelerating electrification could actually bring some quite early benefits. So it might save households about £40 a year by 2030, simply by spreading the fixed costs across more demand. So there are some interesting sort of wins along the way. But I think we need to all get better at managing electricity. In the old days, we turned coal-fired power stations up and down to match demand. Now supply comes from renewable wind and solar. We have to turn demand up and down to match supply, which we call flexibility. And so for context, the grid runs somewhere between 13 and 45 gigawatts at its extremes. And National Grid's Clean Power 2030 analysis estimated that we have about 4 gigawatts of demand flexibility today, depends how you measure it. But that needs to grow to about 12 gigawatts by 2030, so tripling by the end of this decade. And more than half of that is going to come from EV smart charging. So an EV is a huge load. So in power terms, it's 7 kilowatts, which is by far the largest load in a house. And in terms of energy, an EV consumes over any period of time as much energy as a house. But it's also a very flexible load. So the average EV only charges for 1 hour a night on average, but it's plugged in for 12 or 14 hours. And it turns out that a very large but very flexible load is exactly what a renewable grid needs. So I think in terms of your question about scale and timing, we've now got 2 million EVs on the road. More than a quarter of all new cars are full battery electric vehicles. And we have hundreds of thousands of EVs already smart charging. So I think it feels like Flex is really starting to scale.
Thank you so much, Pilgrim. So it's evident a huge scale and an urgency to be connected more and more while we're moving to net zero. So understanding the scale, that means that essentially the EV deployment and readiness cannot be delivered by single organization. Who are the key players and what responsibility do they have? And I will start with you, Phil.
I think we're seeing that this is a collaboration of a number of different stakeholders when we're talking about rollout of scale. So just to quickly summarize a few, there's obviously the consumer themselves and their aspiration to have an EV charger or their requirement if they've been provided with an EV. And that need and that want. Obviously, there are individual consumers at domestic scale, but there are also fleets as well we need to consider. And fleet owners and operators are moving at scale to decarbonize as well. So they're looking at selection of charging infrastructure as part of that. There is the delivery of that process as well. So there are the charger providers themselves, including the hardware and the connection, but there is also the operation, the commercial models associated with that. There are a number of different access points to charging in terms of how you pay for it and the commercial metering and management of that, and options in terms of who the site owner as well. So in domestic charging, clearly it's the homeowner, but it may also be, of course, a landlord. And then in commercial terms, we have EV charging hubs, and they may sit on a campus or a public land parcel or a private land parcel, and therefore ownership and management of the scheme and how that is to be delivered is also key. We have the network utilities in terms of facilitating, connecting, and providing capacity to that. You have organizations like ourselves that are also helping to plan for this as well. So understanding the different elements from a spatial context of where to deliver chargers, how to connect, the design criteria for networks, both public and private, and working through that capacity piece. And then you may also have flexibility operators as well, which might be the charging system operator itself, but there are other aggregating parties that will include EV charging as part of that setup and then derive that. And we're seeing linked to that energy suppliers, of course. So energy suppliers, linked to what Pilgrim said about tariffs and flexibility, quite often that is driven by some form of payment or tariff mechanism that drives that behavior. So if you have an EV charger at home and you get a cheap tariff for charging your car at night, that will tend to be what you would do, and that will determine the time of charge. And it will also, of course, determine the capacity required and when that's required to deliver that charging as well. So I've probably a number of others I haven't thought about, but there's already there a wide range of stakeholders to be included.
Thank you so much, Phil. So loads of stakeholders involved. Also your perspective, Pilgrim.
Yeah, I think in the good old days, all the generated electricity ran through the national transmission network, so National Grid could see it, manage it, plan for it. But as generations become distributed, I mean, you'll know the numbers better than me, George, but as far as I can tell, between 25 and up to 50% of all the electricity in the UK is now not flowing through those transmission towers. It's only flowing locally in the high voltage and low voltage networks that the
Of
DNOs are
course.
operating. And that obviously is shifting a lot of management burden onto you guys. As Phil mentioned, I mean, I think ultimately the transition is really about customer pull. And everyone that touches an EV customer or potential EV customer can sort of help to unlock that. So the media, OEMs, lease companies, suppliers, as Phil said. I think as the service which provides the sort of connective tissue between cars and the grid, I think charging companies like Pod can help make smart charging the default with incentives. So for example, Pod now offers up to £100 a year for smart charging through our Pod Rewards program, and that's on top of tariff benefits. So I think Flex can even, unlock new business models. For example, subsidizing the installation cost. So as a driver, leasing gives you an EV without the capital cost, and Flex can give you a charger without the capital cost.
Thank you so much, Pilgrim. I will talk slightly also and comment from my perspective as being sitting from the Key Power Networks perspective as a network system operator into London, East and Southeast of England, that we play, of course, a key role in the whole EV market structure, trying to make sure that the electricity network can support the transition to EVs in an efficient way. We are not essentially as a network and system operators the ones that we are installing the EV chargers and infrastructure. We are the key, though, enabler to it, as the charging infrastructure ultimately needs to connect to our network and be properly planned around capacity, future demand, and local decarbonization plans. A big part of our role as network operators is to provide visibility and insights to all our customers and stakeholders involved, where there is capacity and where there might be constraints in the network. The earlier we understand what is coming up in the pipeline from the market, the better we can plan the network and identify the most efficient solutions for everyone. We provide data, guidance, network insight, different options, including, of course, flexible approaches, so that our stakeholders can make informed decision on where to install their EVs. And on that aspect, I would like to flag out that I'm sitting in a team that works with local authority. And if there are any local authorities in this virtual room or any charge point operators working with local authorities in our coverage area, you can easily benefit with free digital tools like the charge point navigator that we have developed, which is essentially helping local authorities to self-serve, identify suitable location for the charge point, bring it to get together in one place, in one software network capacity, demand, and local planning data. I'll pause there and I'll move to another question that I am keen to hear thoughts from both of you, Phil and Pilgrim. So, moving around network more specifically, as EV demand grows, some location will need careful planning to make this new connection work more efficiently. What options are there, and how should organization decide which one is the best for them? And I will start with you, Pilgrim, on this time.
Yeah, so I think in a simplistic sense, if all EVs charged at once, that will break the network. But that's always been true. If everyone boils their kettles at once, that will break the
Yeah,
network.
correct.
So there's got to be a mixture of pragmatic sort of statistical planning, but also I think balancing how we apply flexibility. So as Phil was talking about, if you're building a housing estate or a car park or maybe underneath a block of flats where there's going to be a lot of new EVs in a concentrated area, you can use dynamic array load balancing to limit the maximum local power, maybe to avoid the need to upgrade a connection. And that's absolutely fine up to a point. But if you're using load balancing to protect the edge, then you're using up some flexibility, which could otherwise help to protect the wider DNO network and to even help the national grid to balance supply and demand. And that's important because the more flex we have across the whole network, the more wind and solar we can put on the network and keep it stable. So flex doesn't just solve the immediate problem, it's actually like the third leg of a net zero stool alongside renewables and network upgrades. So I think there has to be a balance. Yes, let's be clever and flex, but also, yes, let's add more copper when it's needed. And I think, again, for me, consumer pull really is the key to unlocking sort of permission to flex. We've got to engage customers in smart charging. I mentioned, that we have up to £100 a year for pod rewards, but we also actually have a tariff option now that we're owned by EDF, which can save people £450 a year for opting into flex. Which is a really compelling incentive for people to play their part in the transition.
Excellent. Thank you, Pilgrim. And your views, Phil?
I think there are a number of things that we look at in addition to what Pilgrim's already mentioned. So I think in terms of the spatial context, making sure that EV chargers are located in the right area.
Mhm.
I think domestically, having a driveway and putting a charger in is a no-brainer, but there are people that don't have driveways. There are local authorities that wish to meet their targets in terms of distributing EV charging, and history tells us they're not always in the right place. And they're not always accessible. They might have been shoved at one end of a car park because there were some free spaces there, or that was the easiest place to connect the chargers up, etc. And then they're underutilized for those reasons as well. So planning where utilization is going to occur and making sure that you then coordinate that with where users are going to go and accessibility is quite a key part of certainly any corporate or public charging type of facility. The other thing I would add is the type of chargers. So
Mm.
Pilgrim mentioned the 7 kilowatt for domestic, but there are other chargers if you're fleet or if you're public charging, you'll use higher power chargers. We also do strategies where we mix them. Sometimes a client will say to us, "Oh, well, of course we need to roll out 7 kilowatt chargers on every car parking space." And we go, "Yes, you could do that, or you could put some more higher power chargers in a few of them." They requires a different
Mm.
type of electrical connection, but based on utilization and spatial allocation, using higher power chargers can sometimes be the right option for your site as well. And then, as well as the flexibility options integrated into charging infrastructure, we're seeing there are other ways to deliver. So we've touched on one item, which is tariff management and access. So changing your charging structure is one item. If you're in a public space, changing your parking strategy is another way of doing it, encouraging people to use chargers, also encouraging them to leave chargers when they're finished, and integrating renewables. We're doing a lot now to reduce the cost of operations. So solar carports, small-scale battery storage systems, etc., located in conjunction with charging arrays can really help reduce cost and deliver that flexibility without necessarily changing the charging management itself, because you've got other assets sat alongside it doing that flexibility for you. So the context really depends on whether it's domestic or whether it's public charging or whether it's commercial corporate charging, but there are a number of different ways to plan accordingly.
Thank you so much, Phil. And I will echo on both your sayings and perspective, Phil and Pilgrim, that there is no one golden magical solution for everything. There are many different options, many different smart solutions, and it depends on case by case scenario which one is the best. The only certainty is that there are many different options to suit each different scenario. Either it is from a network perspective, a profiled connection allowing higher capacity on specific times, or it is a ramped connection allowing charging hubs to start with a quicker, lower capacity connection and expand over time, or taking advantage of EVs as a battery connected to the grid, giving back power to the network. So we talked about what is the different stakeholders. We talked about what can be the different smart solutions. What about opportunity and gaps that they are in place in the current sector that needs to be addressed? Are there any advantages of EV chargers outside of the obvious one of charging cars? And I'll start with you, Phil.
I think there's a few things that come to mind that are being looked at currently, but are not as commercially business as usual at the moment. So, Pilgrim talked about grid support from chargers as well as flexible demand. There's direct contribution into grids with vehicle to grid as it's badged. That's something that's been talked around for scale for some time, but in reality is only being demonstrated through some discrete innovation projects. There's a number of reasons why it hasn't been rolled out at scale, and that's mostly around commercial and liability models more than the technical focus as well, in terms of insuring batteries and making sure that life cycle of batteries is optimized, etc. But now technology is moving on and it's becoming even more viable to do that. A linked item is vehicle to buildings, where you don't necessarily distribute directly into the grid, but you distribute energy within a complex, and that might include large complexes or individual buildings. For example, you could classify an airport in that sense, that if you're supporting the building operations at scale from the car park, or you've got an underground car park, that you've got buildings connected directly to chargers, you can push energy both ways. So that's entirely possible to support a site. On a sort of different angle altogether, I think one of the key gaps that we see in commercial models is social tariffs. Why there's definitely an issue at the moment in the marketplace that those that do not have driveways for domestic charging get penalised by having to use public facilities and pay high rates. There are some changes in the regulations now that allow local community generation and demand to be coupled, that could really open the door to lots of community-based charging schemes and agile tariffs that are supported by low or non-profit community based approaches, which could make charging really, really quite affordable for everybody, which it isn't at the moment for everybody. So I think we're looking at that as an innovation model at the moment. And that's something that's been trialed and tested in the US in small components, but in a UK context, there's clearly a huge market for looking at rolling that out at scale.
Thank you, Phil. And Pilgrim, your views?
Yeah, so uses of EV chargers beyond just charging them. Absolutely, as Phil mentioned, I think V2G is going to be huge. I mean, it doubles the value of EV Flex to consumers, but also to the grid. And to maximize the value of that, the car will need to do much more importing and exporting. And currently that's inhibited by something called the final consumption levy, which places a 6p tax on every imported kilowatt hour that you don't get back if you export. But the government's committed to addressing that. I think a couple of other interesting use cases. One is around network monitoring. So DNOs have about 500,000 low voltage substations with no metering or management. And voltage regulation of the low voltage network is becoming an issue for EV charging customers. We can see it from our data. Under and over voltage issues are growing. I've recently been part of something called Project Solve, which was run by another DNO, Electricity Northwest, which is exploring using consumer devices to help fill in DNO blind spots to monitor and manage the LV networks. Modern EV chargers contain metering just like a smart meter, but they're connected via Wi-Fi, so we can get much finer and more timely data at scale. And also, an EV charger is a big load, so it can directly measure network quality. You know, apply a 7 kilowatt load, see how much the voltage drops, and you're directly measuring the ESR, the effective series resistance, which can help, you know, uncover poor joints and so on. So that's all about monitoring, but then that can then lead into network management. And I think we're going to end up with a world, and we see this in some other countries, where we have effectively hyper local flex. So nationally, at the moment, we have frequency response markets where if overall the whole network has problems in supply and demand, things can react to that very quickly. Well, I think we'll probably see a similar market for voltage response. So if Mrs. Miggins at number 3 is charging her car and the local network voltage is getting too low, then Mr. Bloggs at number 3, his home battery or his V2G EV could potentially export to resolve that.
Thank you so much, Pilgrim. And I was on the fortunate position to be project manager on one of the quite big project here in UK Power Networks of LV visibility, where we installed thousands of equipment where we can now monitor live as UK Power Networks and network and our substation what is the available capacity, what they are consuming, and essentially complements what Pilgrim mentioned, where the network operators are now evolving and they have visibility of what the substations are doing in comparison with several years ago, that it was much more difficult to predict what is going on or understand what is going on our substation. So the networks have changed, have evolved, and now we can very easily see what is the consumption range on our different locations. I would like I can see there are 2 questions raised, and it's good to answer that. So I'll ask the first question. The first question that was raised on to panel view on the statement, the most sustainable private car, probably the one you already have. I don't know, Pilgrim or Phil, if you want to comment on that statement. The most sustainable private car is probably the one that you already have.
So I suppose the question is asking whether whether the embedded carbon of an EV justifies scrapping their existing car. And I think probably not. I think cars should be replaced when it's time to do so. But the payback time in carbon terms for an EV is now, I think, well below 18 months. So, you start to become carbon, negative, as it were, by moving to an EV much, really quite quickly these days. So increasingly, that argument doesn't really stack up.
I would totally agree. Is there any comment that you would like to make, Phil, on that?
Not specifically on I think that's down to a consumer selecting where they're buying the car from, where it's imported, and doing some of that homework. From an energy perspective, sustainability is also how you charge your vehicle as well. So there are real options there in terms of the energy consumption to look at low or zero
Exactly.
carbon tariffs and managing that aspect of it, which also comes down to consumer choice as well.
And,
So I think that's something to consider.
and also, I should have just mentioned second-hand EVs, which of course
It's an option.
you've already paid the embedded carbon there, so it's saving from day one.
Thank you both. Another question on the panel's view on building heavy-duty vehicle EV charging infrastructure. What are the views in there on new multi-megawatt sites, highly grid constraint. So again, on that aspect, it needs to be seen from my view on a case-by-case scenario and examined what it is that the customer is trying to do there and how it can be coordinated with a network. And it's always options there to be more cost efficient and more energy efficient at the end. I don't think it is like we should see things black or white, but there is a discussion and engagement with different stakeholders to understand the most suitable solution for you. And that applies to both questions, essentially, even on the previous one on more sustainable private car. There is no black or white, that needs to be discussion with the different stakeholders to understand what is the best solution, and there are solutions. Any comments from your side, Pilgrim, on that?
No, I have nothing to say about very large scale EV charging. Pod, the one thing Pod does not do is rapid charging, en route or charging up trucks and things. Although I suppose maybe EO does get involved in that to some extent now.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. So mindful of time, I can see there's no other open questions. Mindful of time, I would like to make one closing question for both of you, Phil and Pilgrim. As we see EV uptake accelerating, what would be the one change or action most crucial that you would like to flag out to our audience today to stay EV ready over the next 5-10 years? So over to you, Phil.
For me, in terms of this context, we know that EV and heavy duty vehicle in that context, demand is going to increase significantly going forward. So we are on the page as Buro Happold and the work that I do in terms of helping to navigate that journey in terms of forward planning, where that charging is required, the ask, the capacity need, etc., and helping clients to understand their technology applications. One of the things we haven't touched on today is the competition for capacity, as I badge it, which is that EVs have some degree had the luxury so far of being the first sort of low carbon technologies to be heavily funded, subsidized, and implemented. Going forward now, we're seeing huge competition for capacity around the deployment of data centers, low carbon heating, local authority growth plans, housing coming in that all requires additional capacity as well. And the net result of that, which is openly published by NESO, is the amount of additional network capacity that's needed and the amount of additional flexibility that's needed to cope with that. So we now have to see things from a very system-based perspective, in that understanding that you need to navigate that. And I think one of the solutions to that as well, potentially, is to consider everything as an integrated system when you're looking at local planning with local authorities, with network utilities, or if you're on a development, is saying, actually, how can I couple in these low carbon technologies, leverage flexibility from all of these assets, including the EV charging, adjust my commercial models to actually deliver faster, as opposed to looking at everything in an isolated fashion. So I think that's the way things are going to go anyway, but there are already mechanisms in place to help that.
Absolutely. Very, very good point, Phil. Pilgrim, your view?
It's a very tough question. There is no one thing. The ADE, which is our industry body for decentralized energy, recently reviewed all the policy innovations that would make a difference, and they came up with more than 70 of them. And they all address different problems. So it's not either or. We need to address all of the obstacles in parallel now. But I think broadly, my big message is that incentives beat enforcement. Pod rewards, pod power shows that consumer pull drives change faster than regulatory push. And I think key to that really is policy consistency as well. We've had some quite contradictory signals recently. ZEV mandate wobbles, electric vehicle excise duty discussions, fuel duty freeze, all of these contradictory messages that are hitting the consumer. And of course, loading all the costs of the transition onto electricity. If we could just resolve that would solve the heat pump, problem overnight. So I think, sort of in summary, government needs to remove the obstacles, and there is a huge amount of work going on to do exactly that. Industry needs to reward the right behavior, and then consumer pull will do the rest.
Thank you so much, both. And I will add on that for us as my own perspective representing today the distribution network system operator of UK Power Networks, the most one crucial action that we want to see is the continuous collaboration. If we are going to roll out EV infrastructure required, then networks, local, national government, charge point operators, independent connections provider, private sector, all have to work together to ensure that the infrastructure is rolled out quickly, cost efficiently in the right location for our customers. So I would like to thank once again Phil and Pilgrim for sharing your insights today, and thank everyone for joining this session. What has come through clearly is that being EV ready is not just about installing EV chargers. It's all about planning early, understanding network capacity, using smart, flexible solution where appropriate, making sure the right stakeholders are collaborating on the right time. Local authorities, charge point operators, consultants all have a role to play. And the earlier this collaboration starts, the most efficient the outcomes are going to be. So I hope today's discussion has given you practical points, thoughts to go away with and to take away with you, whether that is engaging earlier or considering flexible connections as option or thinking more strategically about how EVs charge fit into the wider net zero planning. I would like to thank once again our speakers and everyone who joined, and we look forward to continue this conversation in the future. Thank you.